should fall off the ground. Okay. We'll talk about them in science too. Is this incredibly important? Okay. All right, chapter 6. Recording's good. Thank you, Layla. All right, there's 7 and 6. All right, so we're on page 75. The people that lived in hiding. So, yesterday we left off. Caspian had escaped the castle thanks to Dr. Cornelius. What had happened that caused him to need to escape right away? Cameron? Very good. So what did that mean? Why is he now in danger because the queen had a baby? Right. So now Caspian's just in the way, right? So now Dr. Cornelius is saying, hey, you need to get out of here as fast as possible because Caspian now has his own heir, and he's going to try and get rid of you if you don't escape. Sorry, Miraz now has his own heir. Thank you. And Caspian is going to needs to try to escape. All right. As he is escaping, he on his horse Destrier, he runs into a branch, gets knocked out, falls on the ground. Who finds him? There's 3 people. Manuel? Very good. What are the 2 dwarfs' names? Go ahead. Okay, so the 2 dwarves are Trumpkin and Niggabrick. The badger is Truffle Hunter. Okay? By the end of it, he kind of tells them, look, you don't need to kill me because I'm actually on your side. And they say, okay, well, if you're on our side, then we need to introduce you to the others. What do they mean by the others? Brooklyn? Not the other dwarves. You're close. I mean, there are other dwarves, but it's not just dwarves. Yeah, all of them. The old Narnians, the dwarves, the centaurs, the animals, the talking trees, animals, all those things. Okay? He wants to introduce him to all of the Narnia of old, is what he calls it. Okay? So today, that's what we're going to talk about. The people that lived in hiding. Luke. As long as you don't get up, I'm fine with that. Okay. People that lived in hiding. Now began the happiest times that Caspian had ever known. On a fine summer morning, when the dew lay on the grass, he set off with the badger and the 2 dwarfs, up through the forest to a high saddle in the mountains, and down onto their sunny southern slopes, where one looked across the green wolds of Archenland. We will go first to the 3 bulgy bears, said Trumpkin. They came in a glade to an old hollow oak tree covered with moss, and Truffle Hunter tapped with his paw 3 times on the trunk, and there was no answer. Kind of like this. Then he tapped again, and a woolly sort of voice from inside said, "Go away. It's not time to get up yet." But when he tapped the 3rd time, there was a noise like a small earthquake from inside, and a sort of door opened, and out came 3 brown bears, very bulgy indeed, and blinking their little eyes. Why do you think the bears said, "Not time to get up yet"? Brian? They were hibernating. Good. And when everything had been explained to them, which took a long time because they were so sleepy, they said, just as Truffle Hunter had said, that a son of Adam ought to be king of Narnia, and all kissed Caspian. Very wet, snuffly kisses they were, and offered him some honey. Caspian did not really want honey, without bread at that time in the morning, but he thought it polite to accept. It took him a long time afterward to get unsticky. After that they went on till they came among tall beech trees, and Truffle Hunter called out, "Powder-twig! Oh, Powder-twig! Powder-twig!" And almost at once Bounding down from branch to branch till he was just above their heads came the most magnificent red squirrel that Caspian had ever seen. He was far bigger than the ordinary dumb squirrels which he had sometimes seen in the castle gardens. Indeed, he was nearly the size of a terrier. What's a terrier, Jacob?
Wait, is it both of them?
Mm-mm.
Oh, a dog?
Mm-hmm. Type of puppy. So imagine a squirrel as big as a puppy.
Oh my gosh.
And the moment you looked into his face, you saw that he could talk. Indeed, the difficulty was to get him to stop talking, for, like all squirrels, he was a chatterer. He welcomed Caspian at once and asked if he would like a nut, and Caspian said thanks, he would. But as Pattertwig went bounding away to fetch it, Truffle Hunter whispered in Caspian's ear, "Don't look. In fact, look the other way. It's very bad manners among squirrels to watch anyone going to his store, or to look as if you wanted to know where it was." Then Pattertwig came back with a nut, and Caspian ate it. And after that, Pattertwig asked if he could take any messages to other friends. "For I can go nearly everywhere without setting foot to the ground," he said. I kind of imagine, you know how squirrels are kind of like, they're kind of jerky and they're like super, yeah, kind of twitchy, and move real fast, you know what I'm saying? That's kind of how I imagine Pattertwig. It's just like, he talks super fast, he just moves fast, he's always like, all the time. Truffle Hunter and the dwarves thought this a very good idea, and gave Pattertwig messages to all sorts of people with queer names, telling them all to come to a feast and council on Dancing Lawn at midnight, 3 nights ahead. "And you better tell the 3 Bulgies, too," added Trumpkin. "We forgot to mention it to them." Why do you think Pattertwig, the squirrel, is designated the messenger? Connor?
Because he can get from place to place really quick and
Very good. Their next visit was to the 7 brothers of Shuddering Wood. Trumpkin led the way back to the saddle and then down eastward on the northern slope of the mountains till they came to a very solemn place among rocks and fir trees. They went very quietly, and presently Caspian could feel the ground shake under his feet, as if someone were hammering down below. Trumpkin went to a flat stone about the size of the top of a water butt, and stamped on it with his foot. After a long pause it was moved away by someone, or something, underneath, and there was a dark round hole with a good deal of heat and steam coming out of it, and in the middle of the hole the head of a dwarf, very like Trumpkin himself. There was a long talk here, and the dwarf seemed more suspicious than the squirrel or the bulgy bears had been. But in the end the whole party were invited to come down. Caspian found himself descending a dark stairway into the earth, but when he came to the bottom he saw firelight. It was the light of a furnace. The whole place was a smithy. What do you think a smithy is? Raise your hand if you've heard the word blacksmith. Okay. A smithy is like where a blacksmith works. Okay, that was the job of the dwarfs. Their job was to be kind of like the blacksmith for the old Narnians. They formed the chainmail, the armor, the swords, the shields. That was their job. They worked with metal and created things all the time. That was what the dwarfs did. Okay, so now Caspian's going to meet some more of the dwarfs. He's climbing down into like an underground cave where this smithy is. He's going to see all these dwarves at work. Okay, Aiden. Make it super quick.
So, 1, I got to see a blacksmith in my poster. 2, I think a squirrel the size of the dog. The dog would be a big squirrel instead. And 3, that squirrel that was in the tree. It reminds me of it's a movie with Little Red Riding Hood and the Granny and the Wolf, but it's after the story, and it's all the stories before that.
Okay.
And so, by the end, Little Red gets captured, and then they give the squirrel coffee to make him go super fast. So you just go like this.
Oh, did you try to see that? Oh, did you see it? Okay. They should be able to help. Okay. Okay, thank you. 10:15. Thank you. All right, make it fast. Did you forget what it was?
Wait, I actually, most of us that have played Minecraft know what a blacksmith is. Yeah.
There you go.
Like they're blacksmith.
Caleb, pick up with us on page 79. So far, all this happened is Prince Caspian is going around meeting all the old Narnians. Okay? The old Narnians, okay, so what's happening is Caspian's going to meet all these old Narnians, and he's inviting them all to a feast they're going to have on the dancing lawn. Okay? So he's not going to be able to go around and meet every single... It would be like if the president came, right? And came to meet, I don't know, the governor of each city, but it wanted to invite the rest of the people to a feast so he could kind of host everyone. You see what I'm saying? Okay? So he's kind of gathering everyone in one place to introduce himself as Prince Caspian, who is the rightful king, but he's trying to lead a revolt against his uncle. Does that make sense? So he's kind of trying to gather a team on his side. That's why he's coming to the old Narnians. Okay? The whole place was a smithy. A subterranean stream ran past on one side of it. Two dwarfs were at the bellows. Another was holding a piece of red-hot metal on the anvil with a pair of tongs. A fourth was hammering it, and two, wiping their horny little hands on a greasy cloth, were coming forward to meet the visitors. It took some time to satisfy them that Caspian was a friend and not an enemy, but when they did, they all cried, "Long live the king!" And their gifts to him were noble. Mail shirts and helmets and swords for Caspian and Trumpkin and Nickabrick. The badger could have had the same if he had liked, but he said he was a beast, he was, and if his claws and teeth could not keep his skin whole, well then it wasn't worth keeping. The workmanship of the arms was far finer than any Caspian had ever seen, and he gladly accepted the dwarf-made sword instead of his own, which looked, in comparison, as feeble as a toy and as clumsy as a stick. Which was better, the Telmarine sword or the dwarf sword? Luke? The dwarf sword. No, not right now. The 7 brothers, who were all red dwarfs, promised to come to the feast at Dancing Lawn. This is important. You remembered? Okay. Oh, yes. A little farther on, in a dry, rocky ravine, they reached the cave of 5 black dwarfs. They looked suspiciously at Caspian, but in the end, the eldest of them said, "Well, you know what? If he's against Miraz, we shall have him for king." And the next oldest said, "Shall we go farther up for you, up to the crags? There's an ogre or two and a hag that we could introduce you to up there." Certainly not," said Caspian. "I should think not indeed," said Truffle Hunter. "We want none of that sort on our side." How do they feel about the ogre and the hag? Matthew?
I would not want an ogre because they're always grumpy
Mm-hmm.
and will do almost anything for a meal.
Mm-hmm.
And then hags are just witches, and everybody knows that witches are untrustworthy.
Very good. So they definitely don't want to have these two on their side. Nope. Nickabrick disagreed with this, but Trumpkin and the Badger overruled him. It gave Caspian a shock to realize that the horrible creatures out of the old stories, as well as the nice ones, had some descendants in Narnia still. So he was happy to find that the nice creatures of old Narnia still existed, but now, knowing that the evil creatures, like the ogres and the hags, they still existed too, it's not as exciting. Cameron, pick your head up for me so I know you're still awake back there. "We should not have Aslan for a friend if we brought in that kind of rabble," said Trouble Hunter, as they came away from the cave of the black dwarfs. "Oh, Aslan," said Trumpkin, cheerily but contemptuously. "What matters much more is that you wouldn't have me." "Do you believe in Aslan?" said Caspian to Nickabrick. "I'll believe in anyone or anything," said Nickabrick, "that'll batter these cursed Telmarine barbarians to pieces, or just drive them out of Narnia. anyone, or anything. Aslan or even the White Witch. Do you understand? Silence, silence, said Truffle Hunter. You do not know what you are saying. She was a worse enemy than Miraz and all his race. Luke? I believe so. But you all have to wait and see. Not to dwarfs, she wasn't, said Niggerbrick. Okay, so we see here that Niggerbrick actually thinks the White Witch wasn't so bad. He's like, she wasn't that bad to dwarfs, so I kind of like her. Keep that in mind. Their next visit was a pleasanter one. As they came lower down, the mountains opened out into a great glen or wooded gorge with a swift river running at the bottom. The open places near the river's edge were a mass of foxgloves and wild roses, and the air was buzzing with bees. Here Truffle Hunter called again. Glenstorm! Glenstorm! And after a pause, Caspian heard the sound of hoofs. It grew louder until the valley trembled, and at last, breaking and trampling the thickets, there came in sight the noblest creatures that Caspian had ever seen, or had yet seen, the great centaur Glenstorm and his 3 sons. His flanks, which are like the muscles on a horse's legs, were glossy chestnut, and the beard that covered his broad chest was golden red. He was a prophet and a stargazer, and knew what they had come about. Long live the king, he cried. I and my sons are ready for war. When is the battle to be joined? Up till now, neither Caspian nor the others had really been thinking about a war. They had some vague idea, perhaps, of an occasional raid on some human farmstead, or of attacking a party of hunters, if it ventured too far into these southern wilds. But in the main, they had thought only of living to themselves in woods and caves, and building up an attempt at old Narnia and hiding. As soon as Glenstorm had spoken, everyone felt much more serious. So you have to understand, the thought here was Caspian and the others were not thinking of going to war. They were thinking more of kind of like building Narnia back up, but just in hiding. Letting the Telmarines keep living in Narnia, but them having their own place to stay as well. But when Glenstorm says, when are we going to fight them? Everyone starts to realize, oh, this might be a little more serious than we thought it was going to be. Okay? Do you mean a real war to drive Miraz out of Narnia? Asked Caspian. Well, what else? Said the centaur. Why else does your majesty go clad in mail and girt with sword? Is it even possible, Glenstorm? Said the badger. The time is ripe, said Glenstorm. I watch the skies, badger, for it is mine to watch, as it is yours to remember. Remember when I said yesterday the badger's job was to remember things? Okay? The centaur's job is to watch the stars. Okay? Sometimes, especially in fiction stories, people believe that when the stars were lined up a certain way, it meant something was coming. Okay? So that's kind of what Glenstorm does. He's the leader of the centaurs, and by watching the stars, he sees that something is coming. Okay? For it is mine to watch, as it is your job to remember. Tarva and Alambil, which are 2 stars, have met in the halls of high heaven, and on earth a son of Adam has once more arisen to rule and name the creatures. The hour has struck. Our council at the dancing lawn must be a council of war. He spoke in such a voice that neither Caspian nor the others hesitated for a moment. It now seemed to them quite possible that they might win a war, and quite certain that they must wage one. As it was now past the middle of the day, they rested with the centaurs and ate such food as the centaurs provided. Cakes of oaten meal, and apples, and herbs, and wine, and cheese. The next place they were to visit was quite near at hand, but they had to go a long way around in order to avoid a region in which men lived. It was well into the afternoon before they found themselves in level fields, warm between hedgerows. Truffle Hunter called at the mouth of a little hole in a green bank, and out popped the last thing Caspian expected, a talking mouse. He was, of course, bigger than a common mouse, well over a foot high when he stood up on his hind legs, and with his ears nearly as long, though broader than, a rabbit's. His name was Reepicheep, and he was a gay and martial mouse. Martial meaning he loved the things of war. He was a very, almost like a military type mouse. He was very soldieristic. He was very disciplined. He was just very. He wore a tiny little rapier at his side, a little sword, and twirled his long whiskers as if they were a mustache. "There are 12 of us, sire," he said with a dashing and graceful bow, "and I place all the resources of my people unreservedly at your majesty's disposal." Caspian tried hard and successfully not to laugh, but he couldn't help thinking that Reepicheep and all his people could very easily be put in a washing basket and carried home on one's back. He said, "Listen, it's great that you're brave and all, but I have a hard time believing you're as helpful as you think you are." It would take too long to mention all the creatures whom Caspian met that day. Clodsley Shovel the Mole, the 3 Hard-Biters, who were badgers like Truffle Hunter, Camilo the Hare, and Hogglestock the Hedgehog. They rested at last beside a well at the edge of a wide and level circle of grass, bordered with tall elms which now threw long shadows across it, for the sun was setting, the daisies closing, and the rocks flying home to bed. Here they supped on food they had brought with them, and Trumpkin lit his pipe. Nickerbrick was not a smoker. "Now," said the Badger, "if only we could wake the spirits of these trees and this well, we should have done a good day's work." "Well, can't we?" said Caspian. "No," said Truffle Hunter. "We have no power over them. Ever since the humans came into the land, felling forests and defiling streams, the dryads and naiads have sunk into a deep sleep. Who knows if they will ever stir again? And that is a great loss to our side. The Telmarines are horribly afraid of the woods, and once the trees moved in anger, our enemies would go mad with fright and be chased out of Narnia as quick as their legs could carry them." "Oh, what imaginations you animals have," said Trumpkin, who didn't believe in such things. Okay, so Truffle Hunter is talking about how, listen, in the Narnia of old, the naiads and dryads, which are the types of trees, they were actually living things, okay? And they would actually like come and help us with war. They would fight people. They would use their roots and pull down buildings and catch people and move them and all these things. But when the Telmarines came in and began destroying all the trees, tearing everything down to build up their cities, the trees kind of like sunk back into themselves. Okay, so they don't really ever what they call wake up. They're just normal trees. Okay, and Truffle Hunter says, "Man, it would be really good if we could wake the trees up, but we don't have the power over them. We can't do anything to them. We can't cause them to wake up." Okay, and Trumpkin does not believe in the trees. He's like, "Wow, y'all have great imaginations." Okay, he's like, "But why stop at trees and waters? Wouldn't it be even nicer if even the stones started throwing themselves at old Mira?"
Yeah.
Okay. He's like, "Why?" He's like, "Oh, you telling me the trees talk? Oh, yeah, okay. I bet the stones fly, too." Like, I don't believe you. The Badger only grunted at this, and after that there was such a silence that Caspian had nearly dropped off to sleep when he thought he heard a faint musical sound from the depth of the woods at his back. Then he thought it was only a dream and turned over again. But as soon as his ear touched the ground, he felt or heard, it was hard to tell which, a faint beating or drumming. He kind of raised his head. The beating noise at once became fainter, but the music returned, clearer this time. It was like flutes. He saw that Truffle Hunter was sitting up, staring into the wood. Ian, you with me? The moon was bright. Caspian had been asleep longer than he thought. Nearer and nearer came the music, a tune wild and dreamy, and the noise of many light feet, till at last, out from the wood and into the moonlight, came dancing shapes, such as Caspian had been thinking of all his life. They were not much taller than dwarfs, but far slighter and more graceful. Their curly heads had little horns. The upper part of their bodies gleamed naked in the pale light, but their legs and feet were those of goats. What animals are we talking about here? Or what creatures? Riley? Fawns. Fawns! Cried Caspian, jumping up, and in a moment they were all around him. It took next to no time to explain the whole situation to them, and they accepted Caspian at once. Before he knew what he was doing, he found himself joining in the dance. Trumpkin, with heavier and jerkier movements, did likewise, and even Truffle Hunter hopped and lumbered about as best he could. Only Knickerbrick stayed where he was, looking on in silence. Why is Knickerbrick the only one not joining in on this dancing party? Brian? That's right. And he doesn't believe in all this fairy tale stuff. Jacob?
And plus, even if the flute that he was playing was magic, Nick probably wouldn't be affected because his heart is probably black.
His heart, he does not, yeah.
Yeah.
The Bible talks about a heart being like a heart as hard as stone, like not being willing to receive, and to listen and to hear.
Yeah.
That's kind of what Knickerbrick has. Sadiq, can you wait like 5 minutes? We're almost done. Yeah? Okay. The fawns footed it all around Caspian to their reedy pipes. Their strange faces, which seemed mournful and merry all at once, looked into his. Dozens of fawns, Mencius and Obentinus and Dumnus, Volans, Voltinus, Gerbius, Nimianus, Gnossus, and Oskins. Pattertwig had sent them all. So they had gotten the message from Pattertwig. When Caspian awoke the next morning, he could hardly believe that it had not all been a dream. But the grass was covered with little cloven hoof marks, meaning the fawns had been there. That was his proof that he wasn't dreaming. They were actually there. Okay? Hold on. Before I take your other hands, I want to show you the pictures of what each of these characters look like. Okay? I'm going to use the pictures from the movie.
Yes!